This is the Big Fish Cares Podcast. Big Fish Cares Podcast. And here's your host, Benny Fisher.
Have you ever heard of a talent optimization expert? That's who I have on the show today. A friend of mine who I just recently met, Brian Alexander, works with leadership teams and companies to improve their team health and to find the optimal recruits and talent for your business. I want to welcome you to the show, Brian. Thanks for coming, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
How the heck do you get into something like talent optimization?
So, hiring a lot of wrong people, when I owned my own business, and I did business consulting actually and coaching for other small businesses. So I owned my own small business and I coached other small businesses. And essentially I just kept making mistake after mistake after mistake. And I had to kind of look in the mirror and say, okay, well, is it everyone that's failing me, or is there something missing? Am I failing them in some way, shape, or form? And that hard look in the mirror led me to understand, like, oh, okay, it's not necessarily always their fault. I'm just putting maybe the right people into the wrong seats and not setting them up for success, or maybe just not understanding how to work with them as unique individuals. I would kind of treat everybody as I would want to be treated, and I said, do it the way I do it. That's how I've always been successful, and came up short. So it forced me to look in the mirror and really kind of reevaluate how I led people.
Yeah, you can definitely do that for a period of time. It'll get you by through the startup phase, I feel like. But after you get past, your first 10 hires, it becomes really challenging. And I feel like, at least for me, I hit my head up against the wall a few times trying to figure out, like, wow, like, they don't all like, commission checks and bonus money. Like some people just want a good old pat on the back, and I didn't understand that, because I thought, like, well, everybody likes money, right? So just, let's have a high-performing commission structure. Let's set up a bunch of big goals, because, my background in sales, that's kind of how I was wired. So it's interesting to see the development as leaders and entrepreneurs, that we realize that we got to figure out a different way to build teams. I think one of the other things that I struggled with was trying to figure out why you mentioned right people, right seats. I want to know where did you come up with that term? And did you ever have a situation where you had someone in the wrong seat, but they were the right person?
Yeah. I mean, starting with myself as a business owner, I think you're familiar with the Colby Index, right?
Mm-hmm.
And,
yeah. 6292.
That's right. Okay. 6292. I'm a 5483. And during that long, hard look in the mirror, I was kind of like the everything. I was the operator. I was the visionary, the integrator, and I was just running myself ragged. And wow. Yeah. That was a life-changing book, that and Rocket Fuel.
Oh, that's my favorite book.
Yeah. So while I was running myself ragged, even though I was skating by, I was a decent integrator, I was a great visionary, and I was just kind of like doing everything, but I was exhausted and I was miserable, and and I'd miss details, and the whole nine of not being an integrator. I just didn't have the great attention to detail, but I just keep doing it, and I had to kind of say, okay, well. I'm in the right seat as the leader of the organization and the CEO, but I'm not an integrator by any means. I'm a visionary CEO, and I'm going to have to find somebody to fill my gaps. And, luckily, I used some data with the Colby Index to be able to do that and solve some of those problems. And it was like a night and day difference. The switch went off. I became happier, lighter. I began, I was a better visionary because of it, because I wasn't being dragged down by the details of the integration and all of that. And, putting somebody into that seat that thrives in that role really just opened things up for me. And then as I saw that kind of work and play out, this was back in about 2016, I began kind of teaching everybody else that within the business coaching realm, or at least exposing them to the idea, because in our world, in the small business world, how that is, the owner and operator tries to do it all, and it's very difficult to pass things off, right?
that's where, like, I would say probably 99% of small business owners in America probably are sitting.
Yeah.
That's the one downside to America, right? Like, everyone can be a business owner. The problem is not everyone's actually a real business owner. Some people just have jobs. There's a lot of small business owners, I'm sure you know, that actually work more hours for themselves and get paid less than they would if they worked for someone else.
Yeah. Yeah,
it's
wild.
a crazy phenomenon. But like, because it's so easy to have a small business in this country, you're going to see a lot of, different kinds of businesses, right? There's going to be ones where the owner doesn't have to be there all the time. There's going to be the one where it's only the owner, the solopreneur, I feel like is what that's called.
Yeah.
But a true entrepreneur, the way I look at it, the way I've always envisioned it is, like, can you start a company? Can you hire all the people? And then can you go sit on an island somewhere for a year? And can you check back in and everything still be going okay?
Right.
That to me is like a real entrepreneurial, successful business, because that's a business, right? Like, that's the business. Like, for instance, someone like, I don't know, like if Apple, I mean, it's been proven, Steve Jobs died. Guess what? They're still going.
Right.
Like, that's a real company, right? Like, it kept on going. And some may say it's better off. They say it's better off without the founder or the owner always sticking his beak in where he shouldn't be, right?
Usually it is. The people that got you to where you are usually aren't the people that will get you to where you need to go, including the founder, in most cases.
Yeah, you're probably familiar with the Steve Jobs story, right?
Yeah.
How they fired him. The board came in, he took all the public money, and then next thing you know, he got voted out. He wasn't able to be CEO of his own company.
That's right.
Went to Pixar, and built. I think there was, he built all the animation stuff, and then Apple came in. I think he had a company called Next. I think Apple came back in to buy Next, and then Pixar got bought by Disney. Steve Jobs was making money at both places. And next thing you know, they need Steve Jobs back in the saddle because they needed the ideas and that visionary thinker. To me, that's one of my favorite all-time business stories of all time, is the fact that you can start a company in your driveway, in your garage, get fired from your own company, and then they basically beg you to come back, and you make it like just world. I mean, that's when, before the iPhone came out, they hired him back, and then next thing you know, he came out with the iPhone,
right?
Or the iPod. Right. I'm sorry, the iPod, which led to the iPhone, right?
That was a great biography. I forgot what the name of the author was, but it was a biography.
Walter Isaacson.
That's what it was. Yeah. That was amazing.
Yeah, I'm like a nerd when it comes to that.
Nice.
Like, he's probably my favorite visionary because he's the one that I kind of can relate to, because I grew up in the 90s. You probably grew up in the 90s, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we know what that's like. Well, how did you get your start? When did you get your when did you start your first business?
So, when I was 23, 22, me and some friends opened like a nightclub and a lounge. It was a restaurant, nightclub, and lounge in a very kind of up and coming area of Chicago called the Restaurant Row, Randolph Street. And it was my first dive into entrepreneurship. You talk about working 18 hours a day or something like that. That was exactly what that was. But marketing, promoting, you name it, you had to do kind of it all. It was a crash course. I joke around. Never graduated college, but I got my MBA from the School of Hard Knocks of life and business by myself. So started at an early age. And then I went into the corporate world after that and did pretty well in sales, selling B2B technology to healthcare organizations. So built like a $40 million book of business. And then I ended up falling in love with, believe it or not, we were talking about health a little bit earlier, but I was a little out of shape and kind of living the happy hour life within the corporate world. And so I started doing CrossFit while I was working at that job. I was at CDW doing really well, and I started doing CrossFit, lost a ton of weight, and I just became obsessed with it. So I opened a CrossFit gym while I was working at the corporate job, and eventually the CrossFit gym just kind of blew up and became an amazing kind of fast-growing thing. So I left the corporate job to do that. In the meantime, we had some kids along the way, bought a second location, started coaching, hundreds of other CrossFit gyms. And, you know, it was an amazing experience. I learned a lot, and that's exactly where I found all the talent optimization stuff, because it was a missing link. We taught all the systems and all the processes to these CrossFit gym owners. And what I noticed was, after like 1,000 calls with these people over the course of 4 or 5 years, we kept running into the same problems, and it was always people problems. It was never like, the guy didn't just read my SOP, or the SOP wasn't good enough. Like, it was never that. It was always people problems.
Right.
And, you know, I had my own people problems that I had to deal with, and it just really kind of made me rethink, like, okay, what if we just start with people first, get the right people into the right seats, and then not worry as much about, like, how they do it all, because if you put the right people in the right seats, you know, chances are they're far better at it than you would ever be. So how can you tell them how to do something when you're hiring them to do it better than you can do it, right?
Yeah, did you know about right people, right seats before you read the book Traction, or like when did the two, like, you know, like, or did you just always know that, or did you read that book and then the light bulb clicked on, or what was your?
It was Rocket Fuel that the light bulb clicked.
Sure, yeah, Rocket Fuel, Traction, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all in the same same family, but Visionary Integrator, that was like the aha moment. And then I immediately went to go take the Colby Index test. I made my wife take it, and I let her read it, and I'm like, you know, this explains me better than I can ever explain myself. It's what I've been trying to tell all my team members and my wife and anybody I've ever worked with. Like, this is what I do well, but I could never really find the words to articulate it, or I just thought I was kind of making excuses and being lazy. Like, it sounded like I just didn't want to do the work, the detailed work.
The hard, boring work, yeah.
The hard, boring work.
The hard, boring work, yeah. Well, that's what makes businesses super successful long term.
Right.
But it takes that, you know, quick startup, you know, person to get it going, because the people that can do the hard, boring work aren't the same people that can get it started either.
That's right.
It's a fascinating concept, and I'm learning. I'm right in the middle of a company right now. I've had it for 7 years. And yeah, man, it was like I was gunslinger. I was blazing. It was fun, you know. And then as soon as I had more than 10 people, man, I was like, whew, like,
right.
Stop. Everything came to a screeching halt. I'm like, I need help. Raise the white flag, you know, like, you know, come save me, because, like, I don't have that same skill level. It's a different skill level. And the hardest part in between there was being able to get my people. You're right, like you said, getting the people to understand. And then getting the person that was responsible for the business, you know, the person I was trying to delegate that to get them to understand how I was. Because when you're working with either a partner, or if you hire someone to kind of like take over, and they don't respect that visionary side of you, man, that could be a recipe for disaster, because that could destroy the culture. Because then there's end arounds, there's people like they're, you know, talking about you when you're not around, be like, oh yeah, he's just at conferences, oh, he doesn't want to work, I'm here doing all the work. Because the first guy that I had running my company, man, it was tough. He was a great guy. He ran the numbers right, the spreadsheets. We had more money than ever before. The culture was starting to erode, because at the end of the day, I felt like he didn't respect everything that I was doing. But I also didn't clearly articulate the vision either. So like I take full responsibility for not being able to lay it all out there. And then when I read that book, Rocket Fuel, it's like click, like bing.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, wow, there's like the button, you know, and now it's like I refuse to run any business without abiding by those principles, because like I need that for my complex brain. I need something simple, like an operating system like that. So that's cool. I kind of want to get back to the what was that first business? The one that you started right after college? What was it, like, where you started like a nightclub?
That was a restaurant and lounge.
Yeah, restaurant and lounge. Tell me about that business. Tell me about that. I want to know about the exit of that business. I want to know, like, how, like, did it do well? Did you make money? How many partners did you have? What was that like, you know, being young? And
it was exciting. I'll just say this: I partnered with friends, and it ended up going extremely sideways. There was a ton of back taxes that were owed, and it ended terribly. It was they siphoned off money, and it was a huge learning experience. And it actually threw me into this massive kind of depression. Obviously, when I invested a good amount of money, trusted friends to kind of take care of the money aspect of it, and I was out there, wooing customers, and
you were the front man. You were like the face, and they're back there, and they probably didn't know any better either. Who knows? Like, I mean, I feel like everybody has. How many partners did you have?
It was four main partners.
It's hard enough to have a second, like one partner, let alone four, right?
It really is, and friends nonetheless.
Yeah, and you didn't have an operating system, right? Like it wasn't like you guys had to book Traction or EO or Rocket Fuel to like even just sounded like a good idea after a night out one night, probably, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can make $20,000 a night at the bar, So yeah, we didn't have our operations buttoned up. I think there was a little bit of shadiness going on, or maybe a lot of bit of shadiness going on. But that ended up horribly, completely ruined me. I went into a deep, deep depression, and it took a while to climb out of that. But I did, and it was the most expensive lesson I've ever learned. But it stuck with me forever in terms of just not ignoring your gut feeling, because there was a lot of like red flags with it, but I wanted to be the cool nightclub owner, and it was fun, and you were getting all the girls and everything.
Yeah, the dopamine was getting released on like what you were actually doing, but like on the back end, it just like, and you don't know what you don't know, right? And I think a lot of people listening, I have a lot of entrepreneurs that listen to this podcast. I feel like a lot of them can get more information and more value out of like learning from other people's mistakes. Is there anything that you can talk about that would be helpful to like, knowing what not to do, or like what happened to your particular situation that could have been avoided or changed, or anything like that you can share with the audience that would be helpful?
Yeah, I mean, number one, if you feel like you have a good intuition about things, events, people, opportunities, don't ignore that intuition for the sake of your pride, maybe. Number one. Number two, I was just way too young and way too dumb and ignorant to know anything about proper partnership agreements and lawyers and you name it, right? I just figured they're friends. What's the worst that can happen? I didn't know what the worst that can happen was. So, partnerships are tough. Partnerships are for people extra hard. I'd say if you think you can do it on your own in terms of starting something and then hiring good people, that's probably your best bet. Believe in yourself more than you could think that you could handle, and then hire coaches if you need it, rather than bringing partners on to fill gaps, because I think that always leads to a bit of a mess overall.
Yeah, that's so interesting. You also, you said it went into a depression. Were you had you gotten married at the time yet, or not?
Not yet. So
tell me about that depression, like, because I think guys don't like to talk about this stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like it's one of those things where if somebody can hear about someone's story, right, that's willing to talk about it, right, that's especially so far in the past, right? How did you climb out? First of all, what does depression feel like? And describe depression to me.
It's you're just numb. At that point, everything I understood about good and bad, good people and bad people, all my axioms were shattered, because I couldn't understand how I could be both deceived at the same time as manipulated and in everything that comes with it. So everything I understood about kind of reality in life was turned upside down. And then you just become numb and you just don't want to feel. So you get into drinking a little too much, maybe some recreational drugs to kind of you don't want to think about it. And you just kind of like stay in this rut, this negativity, the blame. You blame everybody but yourself in the beginning. And, that doesn't make it any better. And you begin to become, a terrible person to be around. And then you attract terrible people because you are that terrible person. And it really does take hitting rock bottom sometimes to turn your life around, or to find some purpose, or to wake up and take things a little bit more seriously, I think.
Yeah.
So it was the best thing that ever happened to me, even though on paper it was definitely one of the worst things and it was painful to go through. But again, hitting rock bottom, I think for me, that young, kind of got it out of the way, and it took away my fear to fail early because I realized like I thought it was the end of the world. And, you know, while I was in it, it was still the world was ending and, you know, but as I got out of it and I did something else and I was successful there, then it was like, oh, okay, well, maybe it's not like I'm not just a failure. That failed, that certain opportunity failed or situation, but I'm not a failure. I failed there, but I'm not a failure identity wise, right?
Right. Yeah. Identity is a big thing. How long do you think you were at the bottom for?
I would say a good like year.
A good year.
Maybe longer.
Did you have any family or anything, or like any good friends that like tried to like pull you out, or were you kind of alone during this time? Like, how'd you manage through that time?
Yeah, I kind of like pushed away anybody who I should have brought closer, and I brought in the wrong people closer that I should have pushed away, in a sense.
How'd you talk about the steps about how you came out of that? Like, was it by chance that you got out of it? Like, was it like, did you like manifest that? Did you think, man, this is terrible, I got to figure out something to do? Did you go buy a book, therapy? Like, how'd you get out of it?
You know, it was kind of like hitting rock bottom, and it's happened a couple times in my life, but, you know, I'm not to bring like religion into it, but I kind of just, you know, had a open conversation with God, and I said, look, I need your help. You kind of that surrender motif, right? Where you cannot control it anymore. You can't handle it. It's way out of your control. You just have to let things go. And it was a transformational time in my life, and that's actually what led me to get a corporate job, which, you know, of course, I'd probably not look at it as a positive thing now, but at the time it was something that was able to bring me out of that, right? And kind
structure, stability, right? Like repetition, you know, you didn't have to go out and create anymore. You just had to like go, show up, let your team support you, right? And it feels good, right? To like, you know, have that.
And I got to do, you know, in the corporate job, it was sales. And it was like a hunter role where, you know, missions unlimited. And I'm like, oh, this is like what I'm good at.
Yeah, that tapped the dopamine again. Yeah,
No, it was nothing but dopamine. And it's like, oh, I don't have to manage or operate anything. I don't have to think about the details. I literally just have to go and talk to people.
Yeah, no one's going to steal from you. Like, you don't got to worry about it. You just got to get paid, right? Just go out, close deals, and get paid, right?
Yeah. And I remember, you know, thinking about working at a corporate job. I was embarrassed. And, you know, working for yourself for so long and then going to work for somebody else, it was not, I would say not easy, but I ended up doing really well there. And it was a good stepping stone.
So tell me about your background. Like, where'd you grow up at? Like, what was your family life like? Like, what were your parents like? You know, tell me about the origins.
Yeah, so suburb of Chicago.
Okay.
Grew up there.
So Bulls fan, right?
Yeah, the Michael Jordan era.
Not just a front runner like I was, right? Like, you know, a kid from Canton, Ohio, who was like supposed to be a Cavs fan, but like couldn't help but root for Jordan.
No, we got to experience the whole Jordan era. You know, I'm 42 now, so born in 1980. So I got to experience all of that. It was amazing.
That's awesome.
But middle class, you know, family. My dad was a tool and die maker, which I can't believe he raised me. He was the most patient man in the world, and to be a tool and die maker, you have to have like the most incredible attention to process and detail. And now that I've been able to kind of pick this apart, I gave my dad the Kobe and another predictive index assessment that I did. I gave it to everybody I know.
Everybody, right? Like everybody that you know. Hey, by the way, can you take this real quick before I have a conversation with you? I want to make sure I know how to read you.
Yep. And going back and validating, like, oh, I knew that was what I liked about you or didn't like about you. But my dad he's in the predictive index, he's known as a craftsman, and it's very high attention to detail, very high attention to process and precision. And, you know, I remember him not letting me mow the lawn because I didn't do it good enough, right? It was like that kind of...
Listen, my stepdad was like that. He wouldn't let me mow the yard. I wasn't allowed to help him fix the cars. I wasn't really allowed to do anything like that because everything had to be perfect.
Right. And I was more of a just get it done, good enough. I was a good enough guy, right?
Yeah. So that's very interesting. Now that I think about it, my stepdad worked at the steel mill, and he was in charge of the slitter, so he had the precision cuts and it was probably similar to what your old man was doing. It's like they won't let us touch anything. and now I don't know how to do anything for myself. I literally it almost turned. You know what? That's now that I'm thinking about this with you, it actually probably helped my entrepreneurial journey because I'm like helpless by myself. So like I have to like create something and then delegate and like delegate and then pay someone to do that, and then go out and create more income so I can pay someone else to do that.
Yeah.
So that could be a blessing because like, you know, guys like my dad and probably your dad, they don't want to pay nobody to do anything.
No, not at all. They can do everything themselves. I don't care if it takes 3 months, you know.
Yeah, well, that 3 months, that means they're the bottleneck, right?
Right.
They're the bottleneck from mom saying, like, did you get that done yet? You know, and it's like, no, I haven't got it done yet because, like, I'm still doing this. I got to do that. It's not like, you know, they work hard, and it's almost like a blessing and a curse, right? Because they know how to do everything, and they do it well.
Right.
But they can't get it all done. And then they don't have time to, like, you know, hang out, vacation, spend time with family. So that's so interesting. You mentioned the predictive index, and I know we had a call, I don't know, a couple months ago, and I was, you know, I've heard of the predictive index because I'm an assessment junkie myself. You know, I like DISC and Strength Finders and, you know, Colby, and I use a sales evaluation tool. But I don't know. I'm not that familiar with predictive index. Why don't you share a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, so it's, you know, there's like 800 assessments on the market. If you Google, you know, assessments, there's just an infinite number. There's only a handful of assessments that are actually scientifically validated for pre-hire and selection. So the ones with like scientific validity studies specifically for pre-hire and selection. So only a handful. Colby Index is one. Predictive Index is another one. And there's a couple more out there. They're less known. Some are made more for like high level executives only, and it's very in-depth, like, you know, 200 question type of thing. Predictive Index measures something very different than Colby, though. So Colby kind of measures how you solve problems how you naturally solve problems while striving and free to be yourself. Predictive Index actually measures like drives, your motivating drives, and then the needs and behaviors that you could predict that are associated with those drives. So it's really unique in that sense, and it's a very fast 5-minute assessment, but it's dead on accurate. Just like when you read the Colby, you're like, oh, so how did they know that? They know me. They know me better than I know myself.
Yeah.
Same thing there. Like everybody just is blown away.
Very empowering.
It is. And a lot of people are afraid of assessments because they're like, well, I don't want to be put in a box, you know, and but they don't understand them enough to know that the way I look at human behavior, I'm looking for a rubber band that I always have on me, but I don't have it now. But human behavior, I don't care what it is. It could be Colby, it could be predictive index, is like a rubber band in its natural state. And our natural hardwiring is kind of like that rubber band in natural state. And you can stretch that rubber band in any way, shape, or form, but it's under constant tension and energy to keep it there. And when you let go of that constant tension and energy, it's always going to snap back to its natural state. So when you look at some of these assessments, especially Colby and predictive index, that remain the same and stable over test over test over test, you can count on that data. You know, look, anybody can do anything. I could do some of the stuff my dad does if I really put all my energy into it, but it's going to take all of my energy to do it and continue to do it. You could tell me, hey, Brian, I'm going to give you $1 million a year to be a tool and die maker, but you cannot make mistakes. I'd say, no way. I'm not even going to try it. Not even worth my energy, because I know I'm not wired for that, right? And it's just knowing how you're naturally wired and how you best operate, and then putting yourself into positions, and then, of course, other people into positions where they can show up and be themselves on a more regular basis, every day, right?
Yeah, that's funny you said about the $1 million. I make that same statement all the time about, like, you can't get Ben Fisher to do the same thing over and over again for probably longer than a year, even if you paid me $1 million. I said, because as soon as I get my first $1 million, I'm going to get bored. I'll probably do it for the first $1 million because I can get excited enough about it to, like, I could focus on it.
Right.
But as soon as you gave me my first check, I'd be like, okay, now what?
Yeah, now what? Oh God, I have another year of this. Are you kidding me?
Yeah. You have to give me $5 million for year 2 or $10 million for year 2 or something that. But that's the only way you can get to. But like a lot of people get frustrated because we've all had bosses that don't understand that about us. And like, what do you say to that? Like, I'm sure, and that's what you do, right? You coach leadership teams on trying to get them to understand that we're not all created the same, and that's actually a good thing, right?
Yeah. A lot of leadership development coaching. We do what we call job assessments for specific roles. We'll create a job target to hire against. So let's say I'm working with a company, working with like a laser company, and they have a hunter sales role and an inside sales role, and we create a job target for that company for that hunter role. Mm-hmm. And there's specific behavioral requirements that are like in line with somebody who would be successful in that role. If they have somebody that's not wired in that specific way, we can measure kind of the gaps between who that person is and what the role requires. And then we can predict, okay, these are some of the behaviors that you might be seeing. And when you're able to show them objective data, it's kind of like eye-opening for them, even if they don't believe in this, but they start to see it more and more. Now they have this data that's showing them something they haven't quite really observed, but now they begin observing it, and then we can kind of coach the leader to say, hey, this person is probably in the wrong seat. We can coach that individual how to stretch on a day-to-day basis if you think that it's going to be a long-term solution. Or we can say, hey, this is a great team member. Maybe they're underperforming, because usually that's what happens when you're not in line with your job requirements from a behavioral perspective. But you can look at other positions in the company and say, hey, John, you're doing well here. How's everything going? And you kind of go through that, and you say, we have some other opportunities that I think you might be an amazing fit for. Is it something you might want to explore? And then John might match up with the operations, sales operations director or something like that, where he's like, oh, that's actually what I want to be doing. I don't want to be doing this sales stuff, right?
But why didn't whatever his name was, why didn't Johnny come up to you and tell you, hey man, sales isn't for me, I need to go into ops?
A lot of people aren't self-aware, number one. Number two, they just feel like they could do better, be better if they just try harder, they stick it out. But a lot of the times, they end up leaving anyway because it's just not sustainable. So a lot of turnover could be avoided by just getting the right person in the right seat right out of the gates, or just diagnose all your team members and say, okay, well, who are good fits, who aren't aligned with the roles that they're in, and how do we stay in front of it, right? Because if they're a good employee, like we know how hard it is to get good employees. I don't care what position, just good people in general. It's getting harder and harder. So let's keep that guy or girl in the company. Let's create like a meaningful career roadmap to get them into something that they might enjoy better, but also be more effective at, right?
Yeah, I think that you said self-awareness. I feel like everything starts with self-awareness. But most people, I would say, that I interact with aren't self-aware. And I don't even feel like I was self-aware until about 2 or 3 years ago when I was struggling with this. And I went down that assessment vortex where once I got my first one, I was like, I did a DISC assessment. That was my first one, right? And it said I was 100I and a 94D, and I'm like, and no S and C, and I was like, wow. Well, I was really proud of myself for being super, influential and super dominant, but then I was beating myself up because I wasn't very steady, and I didn't have wasn't very conscientious about systems and processes. And so, in America, I feel like we're taught to stick it out, try harder, like you said. Yeah. Fight through all the negative, let's not gravitate towards what we're really awesome at. Let's figure out what we're bad at, and let's just keep playing in that world for a while. What do you say?
Work on your strength, or work on your weaknesses, right? That's like
it's so backwards, right? Because to me, triple down on your strengths. Find somebody else to do the stuff that you suck at, right? Why is it so hard for individuals and teams to figure that out? It seems like.
Yeah, it's just ignorance, right? Pure ignorance. And if you just crack the whip hard enough, you might get results. I always equate leadership. It's you can either lead as the conductor of an orchestra or as a puppet master, right? Puppet master is kind of pulling the strings. They might put a little pressure here and then put a little pressure there and just keep everyone moving. But the conductor of the orchestra really only needs one hand to kind of conduct the entire orchestra, and everybody's playing the right instrument, and you begin to get better outcomes that way. And I think most leaders, I think both get results. That's the problem. You can be a puppet master and get results and lead with fear and all of that, or you can lead as a conductor of the orchestra and good results as well. So there's no like negative repercussions for most leaders because they're still getting the results. Literally, do they know they're making their team members miserable while doing it, and people end up leaving. You always hear the phrase, people don't leave the company, they leave the manager, right?
Yep.
And it's so true. I think the tide's turning a little bit with servant leadership and self-awareness and all of this, and I hope to be a part of that as well. It's just, educating people on the differences and how we're hardwired and how that's a tremendous thing if you get the right people into the right seats and empower people to be more of themselves.
Yeah, there's a lot of people like the rule of the iron fist, and I feel like in today's workforce and culture out there, I mean, like that's not going to work anymore. Like at the end of the day, there's so many options right now for jobs. I feel like I actually know this for a fact. Like I know some of the people in my circles, and I know that their leadership and their management styles are very like, hey, do this for, 2 years straight. And after you do that, then I'll do this. Right. Well, Listen, man, like if that person doesn't really want to do that and they want to leave your company and go somewhere else where they can get an opportunity a little bit faster because that's what they want. And like, they're not playing by your rules. I get like, hey, we have to have agreements and we have to, be able to follow through, right, to a degree. But like, what do you say to those managers and leaders out there that need to add a little bit more flexibility, into their management style? And where do they get training to do that?
Yeah, I mean that's all a lot of what we do, but it's got to evolve. Like it's a candidate's market. It's not an employer's market right now. We all see that and know that, and we're feeling the repercussions of that. And I joke around, I blame it on the gig economy because people are after COVID. They're like, well, I can drive an Uber, I can do this, I can do that. Like, what am I doing working at a place that I'm miserable at with a boss that literally makes me feel like crap every day, right? So a lot of that, we see it a lot. More often than not, toxic cultures, you're going to have that toxic leadership style, and it just, creeps through the entire culture. So the stuff that we do, it really does help kind of create a little bit more empathy and compassion for how good everybody can be if they're in the right seats. And even as an entrepreneur, if you're building a machine, you want to create the parts of the machine to need as little maintenance as possible. You want to just set it and forget it for as long as you can, so you don't have to come in like a whack-a-mole and
yeah. Well, I don't want oil changes every 5,000 miles, right? Like make me a car that I don't need brakes or oil changes or gas, even for that matter. And like let's measure twice, cut once. I say. Louis Simmons is a famous power coach. He's like a strength coach. I don't know if you're familiar with him. In the powerlifting world, he's an old school guy, but he had a saying for lifting weights. He said, you can't build capacity on top of dysfunction. So that goes for, if you can't build capacity in a single role, if there's a dysfunction in job fit from the team member and then what the job requires, but then also from a organizational culture standpoint, you can't build capacity on a bunch of people that are in the wrong roles. It's just impossible. Yeah, that's one thing. At Big Fish, I got to adjust my, there it goes. When I read the book Rocket Fuel, like I had a bunch of awesome people at my company, right? But we lacked a lot of foundational systems and processes, like where we were being consistent in all areas of the business. Now, all my people were good and we always tried hard and customers loved us. But it's taken 2 years of the integrator to come in and then bring in some other people and really strengthen up that foundation. Because I'm like, all right, more revenue, let's grow. Yeah. He's like, let's once we get the foundation built, the revenue will come and we'll be able to explode faster. And when he said that to me, I was like, I got excited. But then for 2 years, I'm like, all right, what am I going to do now? Like,
looking at your watch.
I need something. Well, that's why I started a podcast.
Yeah.
I'm like, hey man, let's go. Time. And we just hired a VP of sales, which I'm really excited about. So now we'll have, a marketing manager, a VP of sales, operations, finance. Like we're going to have all the different people that you need at the table, right? So that way you're not wearing two hats. Because I think a lot of times, a lot of these people in business, and you have to when you're small, right, but wearing multiple hats can become tricky and complex if the person that's wearing the multiple hats isn't aware of what the different hats are, right?
Right. If it's not, I mean, it's very hard, even if it's crystal clear. It's just difficult to divide your time.
Yeah, you can't do that. Like it's like me trying to like be the, like, you know, I love sales, right? I love marketing, you know, but like I can't. It's really hard for me to pick which Ben am I going to be today. Am I going to be CEO Ben? Am I going to be salesman Ben? Am I going to be sales manager Ben? Am I going to be marketing manager Ben? Because at least like there's little bits and pieces of all of that, right? And it's especially for individuals that, you know, aren't as aware of the situation. And even I'm aware, I'm totally aware, and I still can't pull it off. So I can't imagine anybody actually being able to pull it off in a positive manner.
Right. Yeah, that's huge. And yeah, I think as you're growing the company, you take somebody who's reliable, dependable, and you think you're doing what's best. You say, hey, you're going to take this role on instead of hiring somebody new. I'll give you 50 extra grand a year. But all of a sudden, you're paying him 50 grand a year for a full-time job, and you're actually, negatively impacting the work that he should be doing in his first role. But, you know, it's part of the growth process of an entrepreneur to really say, okay, well, maybe it was a nice, you know, patch or Band-Aid for the short term, but, you know, you hiring a VP of sales, I'm sure, is freeing up a lot of bandwidth for somebody at this point.
Oh, it's freeing up bandwidth for like 3 of my people. So we had our top sales producer. Guy sells $4 million a year, $5 million a year. And, you know, we tried to like, you know, you should be the salesman. Well, the problem with that is he was like really good at sales and really enjoyed it. And then was trying to do both, right? Because like you can't just like lose that production, right? So like, and then you can't do both well. Nope. And then the marketing manager was filling in for kind of overseeing the sales guys, and then the integrator who's running the company is kind of just. It was like running back by committee, right? And we weren't getting worse, but we weren't getting like it wasn't like we were getting exponentially better. Like there was no focus on it, right? And where you put focus, I feel like then is where you can get results, right? And I think that being aware was crucial. But when companies call you up to come in, like where are they at in the process? Like why do they call you? Like is it usually like when there's a huge problem, or is it more like being in front of the issue? Like where do most of the business owners, where are they at when they find you?
Most of it is solving for turnover in a specific role. That's like the obvious number one. It's, you know, what we do best. It's our bread and butter, or magic sauce, if you will, secret sauce. So it's usually solving for turnover in a specific role or multiple roles. You know, if you have a $100,000 role and it turns over, that actually costs you about $250,000 all in, with the tangible and intangibles, interviewing, recruiting, onboarding, you name it, right? So you begin to look at some of that, lost production for the team when you lose people. That's like the no-brainer, where if they spend $20,000 or $50,000 on a solution that's going to save them from even just turning over one role, it's, you know, the ROI is there. But building teams deliberately, so, you know, even startups, you name it, just getting the chance to measure twice and cut once, really. There's so many different things that we could do within all the consulting. But number one now is actually leadership development. So, you know, team members and leaders want to be developed both personally and professionally. And this kind of fills that gap where it kind of solves for both of those problems as well. So, you know, there's a lot of different, I guess, reasons and opportunities. But the primary one is hiring problems and people problems.
Yeah, which is a ton of right now. So when they call you up, and, you know, I don't know if we'll call you the Fixer, right? Like that sounds like a good like movie name for you, Brian the Fixer.
Yeah.
What's the process like? What when they call you up, you know, you like, you know, do you go in and like start just, you know, giving assessments to everyone, and then start like how do you do it?
I mean, just figuring out what they need first. Obviously, needs analysis. You know, what are the problems? Or, you know, I would say, you know, is there a problem that I can solve? And then is the juice worth the squeeze for them? But once they decide, okay, we're going to go through with this, we're going to integrate, we end up doing what's called a knowledge transfer training. So most assessment companies, like everybody but Predictive Index, actually, just kind of, they'll have a consultant come in, they'll get the leadership team together, they'll do some fun games showing the differences, and then they'll kind of like pack up and leave, and everyone's excited for the day, but all those reports go into the little cabinet or the drawer, and it's hard to it's hard to use that data functionally on a day-to-day basis without calling that consultant again and saying, hey, we got a problem here. Can you do this on an ad hoc basis? So the stuff we do, at least with Predictive Index, is we do a knowledge transfer training. We take their entire executive team, CEO down, take their management teams, and we basically transfer all the knowledge. We train them about all the science behind it, the behavioral patterns, job targets, how to best coach your existing team members to stretch to meet their behavioral requirements for the role. And it's a 2-day training, 2 full days. And they come out of it like really confident in terms of knowing the reasons why all of this stuff works and why all of it matters. And then they have access to, a dashboard with all the assessments, and they have a ton of different reporting. So I've gravitated towards that, even though I'm a Colby consultant as well, just because it's a lot more scalable. And I believe I'd like to teach executive teams and companies to be effective and self-sufficient without me. So if I can do that, I've been successful. Of course, I sit on their bench and they call me with all sorts of questions and I help out. But I like this model a little bit because I'm literally developing the company's leadership team, and that stays with them really. It doesn't leave with me, which is nice.
How often after that 2-day training do you have to consistently keep either adding more training or checking in with them so that way it actually sticks rather than just be that flash in the pan?
Yeah, I help them roll it out and integrate it. I do quarterly tune-ups. That's all included in it. We'll solve problems during the quarterly tune-ups and do strategic planning for the next 60 to 90 days. So I'm still constantly involved. But on a day-to-day basis, unless it's a challenging problem, they're really doing this kind of on their own. And they are self-sufficient and they're confident in doing it. So it works out pretty well, I think, for everybody.
You talked about making sure that you understand the role and the person that fits into that role. Do you do do you take the leadership team and then talk about all the different roles that are at the company and then try to create what the ideal role looks like, so then that way the assessment can actually it can work? How do you, for instance, as you say, marketing manager, how do you set up the role for a marketing manager, and then when you test somebody or give them the assessment, how does all that work?
So marketing manager, we take the stakeholders, right? So we would take somebody who might be already doing the role, that's kind of a rock star that we'd want to model after. Then we take their manager, we take their manager's manager, an executive overlooking the team, and then somebody from HR, usually an HR director.
What if they don't have all those people on the team? Can you take other samples from other companies to see what they look like?
You could, but we create these from scratch, and the reason is because a marketing director at your company is going to look different or have different needs and requirements than another company. Just like a CFO at one company is going to be different than another. So we do them from scratch. Anybody who's kind of a stakeholder that understands the role, we'll have them take it. So if they don't have that, hierarchy and the official organization.
Gotcha. So they'll ask questions about what they think the role should look like. You'll get 3 or 4 people to basically put their answers in, and then you'll kind of compute the data and come up with an aggregate, and then be all right, well, this is probably what the role should look like. And then when you assess somebody, then you can see how they stack up against that aggregate of what it should look like in theory.
Exactly. And it stack ranks them. So this isn't the end all be all. Of course, you want to look at, are they a good culture fit? Do they fit the values of the company? You want to look at their resume, and then the behavioral fit for the role. Those are the 3 components that you want to look at. I'd argue that the behavioral fit and the values are probably more important than the resume itself, except for in specific positions. As long as it's something.
Yeah, unless you're a heart surgeon, right? Then we'll take we'll take the resume of the heart surgeon.
Yeah. Put that back in. Put the resume back in. But anything you can teach, so you factor in all 3. But it gives a score as well to see how close of a behavioral fit they are. And then there's one more component, which is, I wouldn't say it's controversial, but it's a general cognitive assessment. And you don't use this for all roles, but the really important ones. And what this is it's not measuring IQ. IQ is kind of the size of the sponge. This is measuring general cognitive ability and how quickly that sponge absorbs water. So really, it's kind of measuring how quickly people learn new things. So it's not going to even dictate will you hire them or not. But if you've created a GCA, a cognitive target for the role, and it requires a lot of new learning in a fast-paced environment, and maybe you don't have the time to train that individual or the bandwidth or the people to train them, you might want to get somebody who picks things up a little faster. So
they got a bigger figure it out factor, right? Like, rather than because we're like, for instance, like our company, it's only 7 years old, but I still feel like it's new, right? There's still, like if we were to hire an HR manager right now, we don't have an actual just dedicated HR person. We kind of, there's the one person like does the administrative part, and then the other person does like this part. And we kind of like patchwork the role together right now, but we don't know what that role looks like. So we would probably take the 3 or 4 people that we would set the role up, right, and then when we go to hire someone, we'd want somebody that can figure it out, because it's like, man, we've never actually like fully done it like a big corporation, right? So we want to use that type of data, right? If they have okay, that's so fascinating.
Yeah. So
why doesn't everybody do this stuff?
I mean, there's a lot of confusion out there. A lot of people don't like the idea of putting people in boxes. Again, even in large companies, but it's becoming more and more prevalent for sure. I think people are realizing that if you're using good data, like we use data to make business decisions on a day-to-day basis, right? But when we're hiring people, we just wing it based on a feeling, like, oh, this seems like a good fit. I like Ben.
Oh yeah, they were at the bar last night, man. I was talking to them. They got great customer service skills, man. They'd be great here. They want to, instead of making $200 a night in tips, they want to come over here and just work a 9 to 5, making the same $200. Let's go.
That's right. Yeah. So, it boggles my mind that we hire subjectively and don't use data. But again, it's more and more people are using something and use some kind of data. I don't care.
Is it like, it's not illegal, right? Like you're allowed to do it, right? Like I've heard like there's, is there laws out there about this stuff or not really?
Well, so this is where it's interesting. This is where using the right assessment for the right thing is really critical. Having the scientifically validated behavioral assessments definitely covers you for hiring if you're using it. Now, there's rules of if I'm hiring for an HR manager, I have to give the assessment to every candidate. I can't just give it to the ones I like or don't like. There's some rules around that, some laws around that. As long as you're using it consistently, you can't pick and choose who you're going to give the cognitive assessment to. If you're going to say, I'm giving the cognitive assessment to HR candidates, it has to be every candidate that applies for that role.
So you can't do like a first round of interviews, be like, all right, I'm narrowing it down to 3, then give all 3 the test?
You can narrow it down, but if you are narrowing it down to those 3, you're going to have to give it to all 3. And then behavioral assessment-wise, it's the same thing. You just have to use it consistently. But a lot of the other assessments, they have a ton of gold and value, but the problem is those change over time, even test over test sometimes. So you can't rely on the data, number one, as much. But number two, they're not designed to be used for hiring selection. So that's where you can kind of get in trouble if you're kind of, force fitting one solution into some space that it's not supposed to be in.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Because I've learned a lot through DISC. Like I know DISC doesn't really measure your ability. Somebody could have the same exact DISC and be completely 2 different ways about going about the job. So definitely learned a lot about that. I usually use DISC on the after the hire.
Yeah,
just to see for people how to communicate with each other, right? Because that's why I love DISC. Just how do you respond to the other person that's not like you,
right?
How do you, without using the assessment, how do you determine within 30 seconds of a conversation what kind of person they are, so that way you can respond more appropriately, right?
Right. Yeah.
I think it's fascinating. Predictive index, that's what it's called. Also Colby. So I feel like that's good information that we learned today. If someone is interested in learning more about this, how would they find you or get more information?
Yeah, either Brian Alexander on LinkedIn or expressingthegeniuswithin.com. It is the longest URL ever, all one word, spell it out, but you'll never forget it. So expressingthegeniuswithin.com. That's
your website.
Yep. Yeah, that's my consulting company.
I like that
website.
Yeah, I like that. So I appreciate you being on the show. I ask every guest 5 rapid-fire questions. Imagine yourself that you're going to be going off to this island by yourself. Kind of like think about Tom Hanks in Castaway, right? Like just you by yourself. What book are you going to take with you?
Oh, boy. What book am I going to take with me? That's a good question. Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill.
You were the first one I've ever had. I'm 50 episodes in, I feel like.
Yeah.
First time I've ever heard that.
It's a the Devil. Book. Incredible book.
Writing that one down. I'll have to get that tomorrow. All right. What movie are you taking with you?
Oh, man. These are tough. You're going to laugh. First one that comes to mind, Pearl Harbor.
Pearl Harbor?
I love history.
Yeah, and being on an island, that'd be a little scary.
Right.
All right. So, what restaurant would you have built there so that you could eat at every day?
Oh, man. There's a Thai restaurant in Chicago suburbs that I've been going to since I was 17 named Siam House. And that would be the one. I was secretly trying to marry my youngest daughter to their grandson so we can get the family recipe. I'm still working on that. She's 7. We got time, but
still got a little time. Maybe give them the predictive index and see if they qualify. You know?
That's right.
There you go. So we did book, we did movie, we did restaurant. You're allowed to take one vacation anywhere in the world. Where are you going to go for a week?
Italy.
Italy, nice.
I love Italy.
The whole place, or are you like a couple different cities, or like what?
Like Amalfi Coast, or even Tuscany.
All right. And then last question, you can spend 24 hours with any person ever in the history of the world, past, present, or future. Who do you pick?
Wow. Another odd, and I would pick Jesus.
There you go. So you're going to take Outwitting the Devil with you, but you're going to spend the day with Jesus. So instead of taking the Bible and then having the devil come, I see exactly what you're doing there, Brian Alexander.
There we go.
Well, listen, it's been really fun hanging out with you today, learning a little bit more about what you do. I really feel like the work that you do is important. I feel like over the next 20 years, I feel like health and fitness was like the big thing in the first, 20 years of 2000 to 2020. I think emotional intelligence, I think, teamwork and communication is going to be what everyone's going to be talking about till, at least 2040 until we start going to Mars. So, congratulations on being a pioneer in this space. I know that you're probably going to be overworked because there's going to be lots and lots of teams needing your help. So appreciate everything you do and look forward to learning more about it later.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on.
And if you get any value out of this podcast, please like, subscribe, comment below. Let us know you're listening. Reach out to us if you need anything, and we'll see you guys next Friday on another edition of the Big Fish Cares podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Big Fish Cares podcast.